Good morning, Paul. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Shaun. Great to talk to you.
Thank you very much. You're a veteran of travel and tourism, conservation, sustainable development, an expert on international relations and sustainable business practices. When you look at this complex relationship between biodiversity and tourism and the positives and the negatives on the balance sheet, what's your reflections on the balance that we should be striking?
Okay, well, I think, to be honest, tourism I'm a great believer that tourism is a force for good. It can be a massive force for good in building understanding, sharing wealth, reducing poverty, and also it can be a driver of better resource management to protect habitats and biodiversity. Unfortunately, our industry doesn't always act like the best corporate citizen, and we have, tales of things like overcrowding and the resulting environmental and, to some point, cultural degradation that sometimes can bring. But I do believe that tourism and tourists are more aware of their impacts, both environmental and social. And many of them in today's world are looking for ways in which to either avoid those impacts or in fact to go further and to give something back to the places and the communities that they visit. So we've seen the emergence of something called travel with purpose. This is challenging people to think about why they're traveling and what they want to get out of it. So there's a real opportunity to provide them with an experience rather than just a visit. And I think getting them involved on the ground in things like conservation and local community projects is a great way of helping redress the balance that tourism brings. And there's many innovative companies out there right now doing just that, linking the tourist and their money more directly to projects on the ground. So I think, growing awareness, making people understand how big these impacts are, and then finding innovative ways, if you like, to join the dots and to invest back in destination habitats and local communities is maybe one way we could go.
So one of your many previous roles is Chief Operating Officer of WWF International. What's your view on the current status of conservation, species loss, and global efforts, and how do you think COVID-19 has changed that?
Okay, I mean, look, when we talk about biodiversity, I think we really have to take a step back and understand the scale of the problem. It's the almost unnoticed change that's going on. Everybody's talking about climate change. Fewer people are talking about biodiversity loss. But if you look at the statistics and what science is saying, many scientists are saying that we're on the cusp of a 6th mass extinction. We've had 5 in the past, including the one that wiped out the dinosaurs. The difference this time is that extinction is largely being caused by human activity. And it's not just the sort of the charismatic, what are called megafauna, the elephants, the rhinos, the tigers, those sorts of things. I think by far the more worrying change is what's happening to the plant and insect species on this planet that are being wiped out through overuse of herbicides and insecticides, and the potential, and I think scientists are getting more and more concerned about this, the potential impact that will have on food supplies and potentially also medical supplies, because we rely on many of those things to provide us with the things that we take for granted on a day-to-day basis. So there is a huge challenge. I think, tourism is a contributor to that, a relatively small one, I would say, compared to some of the other things. But, the things like poor waste management, the appearance of more and more plastic waste in the environment, etc., the impacts of that on tourism, if we can't fix it, are going to be huge. You don't want to go to an exotic location, sit on the beach amongst discarded plastic bottles, or even at the moment medical masks that people have been using to protect themselves against COVID. So there is a lot that needs to be done. I mean, so if you look at it on the surface, the picture at the moment, I would say, is relatively bleak, but there are signs of hope. I mean, I'm naturally an optimist. I do believe that we can actually do something. And I think we've seen some signs of that. I don't know whether you saw the recent report by WWF that talked about how the tiger population around the world has actually responded to conservation efforts, and we've started to see the numbers rise again, which of course is a fantastic sign, because that relies on healthy habitats and ecosystems to happen. And I think, you know, even at the moment during this COVID crisis, we've seen some really encouraging signs how biodiversity fights back, how species have actually come into the urban space in a way that they've not done that before because of lower human activity. So yes, I think it's a huge challenge. It's one we need to really face up to, because I really think it needs to be raised in the public awareness, because at the moment, as I said, everybody's focused on climate change and COVID and not necessarily on biodiversity. But we can't let it be the secret thing that's happening, that at the end of the day is going to have a massive impact on all of us.
No, as you say, it's the second existential crisis, and while we all rightfully focus on carbon neutrality by 2050, we should be looking also at no more species loss after 2030.
Yeah.
So one of the key vectors, the channels for illegal wildlife trade is the aviation industry, airports, airlines. You also had a recent history in the airline industry. Are we making progress? Is this issue taken seriously by governments, airports and airlines?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, it's a massive challenge, because we're no longer just talking about, you know, the odd tourist taking home a souvenir without really realizing what they were doing and the impact that we're having. We're talking now about organized crime on a global scale. I mean, the impacts are massive. And unfortunately, some of those criminals do use aviation as their means of transporting their illegally killed wildlife to market. So this is an issue that the industry became acutely aware of, I think, back in 2015. And work started to try and understand and scope out the issue. It's not a universal issue. You know, you have to look at the trade routes that people are using from places like Africa and South America towards Asia, etc., and take action on that. We were very fortunate in having some, if you like, leadership that emerged, because Prince William of Wales took this issue on, and he established back in 2016 what was called the United for Wildlife Task Force, which representatives from the aviation industry were more than happy to join. And that resulted in what was called the Buckingham Palace Declaration, which has now been signed by 61 airlines around the world, and in total over 170 different organizations. But that's only the sort of, you know, the beginning of the piece. The real recognition was that we had to raise awareness in people working on the ground and in the air of these traffickers, and the tactics that they were using to get their goods to market. So it was, you know, at the end of the day, it's not up to airline and airport staff to be law enforcers. So we had to engage with law enforcement, with the World Customs Organization, and take guidance as well from the Convention on the International Trade in Endangered Species, CITES, on what the right sort of standards would be. And what that's resulted in is a massive training program and the provision of resources to airline and airport staff, raising their awareness, making sure that if they see something suspicious, that they know exactly who to go to and get those people then to intervene and take action. And that is having some impact around the world. And we focus very much on key hubs, places like Johannesburg, Nairobi, Bangkok, where are the key hubs for the transit of some of these materials. And also then raising awareness in the eyes of the traveling public that they shouldn't be buying souvenirs that have been illegally sourced in this way. So again, it's a huge problem. You're up against organized crime. There are many billions of dollars involved in this trade, and so it's not easy to eradicate. But the industry, I think the aviation industry really rose to the challenge and is trying to do the right thing. And even the US government, through the USAID program, has been funding a program called Roots, which is basically aimed at training all of those actors that we mentioned along the potential supply chain to raise their ability to spot and then intervene to actually try and eradicate what at the end of the day is a horrific trade.
So as we translate what scientists tell us into policy and into practical actions.
Yeah.
I think you've mentioned a couple of green shoots and really positive stories. What more do you think the travel and tourism industry can do? What are we still missing? And what would be your elevated pitch to governments and to industry in 20 seconds each?
I think, quite honestly, we need to understand that the tourist of today is changing. There's a greater expectation that travel and tourism companies, whether that's accommodation, transport, or tour operators, do the right thing. People understand environmental impacts. They understand cultural degradation. So they want to make sure that that's not happening. That's a massive opportunity for this industry to get it right and to offer products and services that are really going to resonate with today's consumers and have a positive impact at the end of the day. So, we've seen things being introduced like a better understanding of what's called payment for ecosystem services. So getting tourists to actually make a contribution that goes directly to support some of the activities that they're looking at. The best example I can give you is Rwanda, where people are lining up to pay $1,500 US. It's not a small amount of money for a license to be able to track and spend time with mountain gorillas. Now, I think that's worth every penny, but that's a good example. That money flows back to the local community. The local community recognizes the value then of the wildlife and the habitats that they've got, and therefore they're more inclined to want to protect it and to eradicate poaching, etc. So, there are many ways in which you can do that, using tourism as a force for good, as I mentioned before, and investing back into those things. And there are some really good and exciting companies out there right now that are offering those types of activities rather than just lay around the pool and get a suntan.
Well, we hope to have a number of conversations with some of these product owners, looking at the new business models, the new funding models, the new partnership models out there, and especially also those that place the tourist, the traveler, and local communities at the center of dealing with this, because that's the big impact. We must address the environmental issues, rebalance nature in business, but also keep people at the center of this. So thank you very much for your time this morning. Much appreciated, and we'll speak again.
Okay, thank you, Shaun.
Thank you, Paul.